The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the zoo. The lions roared in the distance, their mighty voices echoing to the compound, but one sound was different. It was a soft, plaintive cry, a dog's cry, coming from the outside of the lion's cage. The zookeepers had heard before, but they brushed it off. After all, animals make noises all the time. But tonight, it was different. The cry carried with it a deep sorrow, as if the dog knew something the rest of them didn't. The dog paced back and forth, stopping only to let out another mournful whine, its eyes fixed on a lion's cage. As the minutes passed, something strange happened. The lion, usually fierce and wild, suddenly stopped pacing within its cage. It stared at the dog, its eyes intense, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The zookeepers watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. The lion was calm. In fact, it seemed connected, almost as if the dog's cry had reached deep within its soul. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the gate of the lion's cage creaked. The sound was faint, but it was unmistakable. The gate was opening, slowly, as though under some mysterious force. The lion's cage door began to swing open. The dog stopped crying. The zoo fell silent. The moment the gate creaked open, an unnatural stillness fell over the zoo. The zookeeper stood frozen, eyes locked on the opening gate, unsure of what was happening. No one had ever seen the lion so calm, and certainly not in such proximity to the dog. The dog, its coat matted with dirt and eyes wide with a deep, unexplained emotion, stood still, staring intently at the lion. But as the gate creaked open further, something extraordinary happened. The lion, once a majestic symbol of untamed power, now appeared more like a passive participant in some ancient, unseen ritual. It took a step forward, its massive paws silent on the ground. The zookeepers, who had once believed the lion to be the embodiment of wild strength, were now unsure what to make of the scene. The dog's cry had somehow reached beyond the barriers of cages and species, unlocking something within the lion. But where had it come from? Why had it cried in such a way? There had to be a deeper connection between the two. The dog had been wandering the zoo for weeks, often lingering by the lion's cage, whimpering softly as if in communication. It never went near the other animals. Its focus was always on the lion. One of the zookeepers, Sarah, had been observing the dog for weeks. She had noticed its behavior, but hadn't thought much of it at first. Animals sometimes have peculiar patterns, especially in captivity. But as time went on, Sarah became more intrigued. The dog seemed to understand something that no one else could see. It would lie quietly outside the cage, its eyes glued to the lion, sometimes crying and sometimes simply waiting. Sarah couldn't help but feel that there was a deep bond between the two. She had seen this type of connection before, though rarely between animals of such vastly different species. She had witnessed it in wild animals that shared territories and in domesticated animals that formed unique friendships. But the bond between this particular dog and the lion was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. Late one evening, after the zoo had closed, Sarah decided to investigate. She quietly approached the lion's cage, her heart racing with curiosity. The dog was already there, pacing back and forth, its paws scraping against the gravel. As Sarah moved closer, she saw the dog stop, its head turning toward her. The dog's eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over her. The dog didn't bark or growl. Instead, it stepped aside, almost as if to allow Sarah to take her place. Sarah hesitated, but then knelt down, looking through the bars at the lion. The lion, who had been pacing up and down in its cage only moments before, now sat perfectly still, its gaze directed toward the dog. The air between them felt charged, as if something invisible was pulling them together. "Are you trying to tell me something?" Sarah whispered, more to herself than to the animals. Her words felt foolish, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the animals were communicating in a way she couldn't yet understand. The lion's eyes softened. Sarah wasn't sure if it was just her imagination, but she could have sworn that the lion nodded slightly. And then, almost as if on cue, the dog let out a low whine and turned to face Sarah, its eyes now filled with urgency. That was when Sarah realized it wasn't just the dog who wanted the gate open. It was a lion, too. The next day, Sarah returned to the zoo early in the morning before the other staff arrived. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the night before. The connection between the dog and the lion seemed undeniable. She knew something had to be done, but she also knew that unlocking the lion's cage was not a decision she could make lightly. Lions were dangerous, especially in captivity. Even the most trained zookeepers exercise extreme caution. But Sarah's instincts told her that the lion wasn't a typical zoo animal. There was something extraordinary about its behavior, something that went beyond its captivity. There have been stories, of course. Rumors whisper among the staff about the lion's origins. They said it was brought to the zoo under mysterious circumstances, though no one knew for sure. Sarah had always dismissed the rumors, but now, with the dog's cry and the lion's response, she couldn't ignore them any longer. Could the lion have been a part of something larger? Was there a history between the two animals that went beyond what anyone had realized? She stood outside the lion's cage, her heart pounding. The dog was there, of course, as it always was. The dog's gaze never wavered as Sarah approached. It seemed to expect her presence, as if it knew she was the one who could make a difference. "What are you trying to tell me?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. The dog's eyes locked with hers, its expression unwavering. There was something about those eyes, a depth of understanding that spoke volumes. Without further hesitation, Sarah made a decision. She would speak with her supervisors and insist that they investigate the dog and the lion's behavior. She would not rest until she found out the truth. As Sarah walked to the administration office, the rest of the zoo buzzed with its usual morning routine. The animal calls echoed through the air, the familiar sounds of a bustling zoo in motion. But Sarah couldn't shake the image of the dog and the lion from her mind. The connection was real, and it was pulling her deeper into a mystery she hadn't anticipated. Hours passed, and Sarah made her way through meetings and reports. But her mind was still focused on the dog and lion. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that there was something special about their bond. But what could it be? And why was the dog crying outside the lion's cage? Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Sarah was granted permission to conduct a deeper investigation. The zoo's director, a pragmatic man named Mr. Patterson, agreed to allow Sarah to explore the possibility of releasing the lion's cage for a brief moment. With the dog present, he was skeptical, of course, but Sarah's unwavering conviction won him over. At dusk, when the zoo was quieter, Sarah approached the lion's cage. This time, she was prepared. The dog was already there, waiting. She unlocked the gate cautiously, unsure of what would happen next. The lion remained still, watching her with those intense, ancient eyes. Slowly, Sarah stepped back. The dog, too, stepped aside, as if inviting the lion to move. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the lion took a step forward. The dog's cry had been answered. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. As the lion took a step forward, the tension in the air seemed to stretch. The dog did not whimper or bark this time. It was as if it knew something profound was unfolding, something that would change both of their lives forever. Sarah stood, holding her breath, as the lion's massive form moved closer to the gate. The lion, usually the epitome of strength and untamed power, now seemed smaller somehow. The dog's presence had a calming effect on it. There was no aggression, no threatening stance. Instead, the lion's steps were deliberate, measured, almost as if it was stepping through a door into an unknown world. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the two animals move closer. The air seemed heavy, charged with the weight of history. She felt an overwhelming sense of awe and confusion, unsure what was unfolding in front of her. The dog, its eyes still locked on the lion, slowly made its way toward the open gate. Sarah remained motionless, unsure she should intervene. Every fiber of her being screamed to stop the animals, to keep them apart, to ensure everyone's safety. But something in her gut told her that this moment was important. The connection between the dog and the lion wasn't just an accident. It was something ancient, something beyond human understanding. With the lion now standing just a few feet away, the dog approached it, its tail tucked between its legs but with no fear in its eyes. The two animals were nearly face to face. Sarah watched in disbelief, her mind racing. The dog's cry had been called to the lion, and the lion had answered it. But why? What was the significance of this meeting? In that moment, the dog let out a soft whine, almost as if it were speaking directly to the lion. And then the lion did something that shocked Sarah to her core. It lowered its head, not in submission, but in recognition. The lion's massive head hovered inches above the dog, and for a brief, unspoken moment, they seemed to communicate in a language only they understood. Sarah stepped forward, slowly, carefully. Her eyes flickered between the two animals. She had seen lions in captivity before, and she had seen dogs too, but never had she witnessed anything like this. She felt as though she were intruding on something sacred, something private. But before she could act, the lion raised its head and looked directly at Sarah. The intensity of its gaze made her freeze. There was something almost human in those eyes. It was as though the lion was asking her not to interfere, to let this moment unfold in its own time. For a moment, Sarah felt as if the boundaries between the animals, the zoo, and herself were no longer clear. She wasn't just a zookeeper now. She was a witness to something that defied logic. She glanced back at the gate. It was still open, a portal to the unknown. Her hands trembled as she looked at the lion's steady gaze. Then, without warning, the dog stepped forward, brushing against the lion's side. The lion did not react in fear or hostility. Instead, it stood there, its powerful body unmoving. The dog then sat beside the lion, its eyes softening as if it had found its place. The two animals were now sitting together, side by side, in complete harmony. It was as if the cage that had separated them for so long no longer mattered. Sarah could hardly believe what she was witnessing. The roar of the lion, once a symbol of power, was now absent. The dog, which had cried outside the cage for weeks, was now calm, its tail gently wagging as it sat next to the lion. It was a scene of peace that seemed to transcend the limitations of the zoo, of nature itself. For the first time, Sarah felt as though she had unlocked the secret behind the dog's cries. It wasn't about the dog wanting the gate open, or even about the lion wanting freedom. It was about the bond between them. This wasn't just a meeting of animals. It was a reunion, something that had been waiting to happen for a long time. As Sarah watched them, she recalled the rumors she had heard about the lion's past. They had said the lion was once part of a circus, a traveling show where it had been paired with a dog as part of a performance. The dog, small and loyal, had been trained to assist the lion, but over time, the bond between them had deepened. The dog's cry, Sarah realized, was not a random sound. It was a call for the lion, a plea for recognition, for reunion. But how had the dog known? How had it recognized the lion's presence after all these years? Suddenly, a shiver ran down Sarah's spine. The realization hit her like a wave. The dog had been crying outside the cage, not just because it wanted the lion to be free, but because it knew the lion needed to remember something important. This wasn't just a meeting of two animals. It was a rediscovery of a shared past. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by a soft growl from the lion, but instead of sounding threatening, it was almost a low rumble of contentment. Sarah took a cautious step back, not wanting to disturb the moment. The growl seemed to signal that the lion was finally at peace. The dog's ears perked up as if it understood, and it lay down beside the lion. The two animals remained there, side by side, in complete silence. The zoo, which had been so noisy just moments before, now seemed eerily quiet, as if it too was holding its breath, watching the reunion unfold. The gate that had once separated them was now open, but it was clear that neither the lion nor the dog needed freedom in ways Sarah had imagined. What they had needed all along was each other. Their bond had transcended the walls of the cage, the boundaries of species, and the confines of time. Sarah stood there, silently watching the two animals. She understood now. This wasn't just about a zoo exhibit. It was about something much deeper. It was about two souls once bound together by an invisible thread, finding each other again. And in that moment, Sarah knew that she had witnessed something extraordinary, something that no one else in the world would ever understand fully. But there was still one question that lingered in her mind. What would happen now? What did this reunion mean for the future of the zoo, for the dog, for the lion? And most importantly, what would Sarah do with the knowledge she had gained? The following days were filled with uncertainty for Sarah. The bond she had witnessed between the lion and the dog seemed to have altered the very air of the zoo. The other zookeepers had noticed a change, too, but they hadn't seen what Sarah had. They only knew that the lion seemed calmer, more docile, and the dog was no longer crying at the cage. The two animals, now inseparable, had formed an unspoken understanding that no one could quite explain. Sarah was still in disbelief. The lion had always been the zoo's star attraction, a creature of immense power and beauty. It had a history, a story that no one truly knew, one that had remained locked away in the past. And then there was the dog, seemingly ordinary, yet capable of unlocking something far deeper within the lion. What had happened between the two that had remained hidden for so long? Despite the peace that had settled over the zoo, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was at play, something she needed to understand fully. The door of the lion's cage had been opened, but now the dog and lion had entered a new chapter, one that Sarah wasn't sure how to interpret. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to dig deeper. The lion had arrived at the zoo years ago under mysterious circumstances, and Sarah realized that it was time to uncover the truth behind the rumors. She needed answers. If this bond between the dog and the lion was as powerful as it seemed, then it could be tied to a greater, unknown story, a legacy from the lion's past. Sarah visited the zoo's archives, a dusty room filled with old papers and forgotten records. She carefully sifted through the files, looking for any hint of information that could shed light on the lion's origins. It wasn't long before she found an old file labeled Cirque de Lion, dated back more than a decade. The file was worn, and the pages inside were yellowed with age. It was a circus company, one that had performed across Europe, featuring the lion as its central act. The lion's name was Athos, a name that Sarah had never heard before. According to the records, Athos had been part of a duo with a dog, a shepherd dog whose name had been recorded as Max. The file described their performances as being particularly unique, different from any other circus act of the time. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Max, the dog from the zoo. She was certain of it. She had seen the connection between them the moment she had witnessed the lion and the dog sitting together. But there was more to this story than she had anticipated. The file detailed how Max and Athos had been inseparable, performing together in a way that made their bond evident to every audience. But there was a twist. The file explained that, after a tragic accident during one of the circus performances, the dog had disappeared. The records were vague, but it seemed that the circus had been forced to disband shortly thereafter, and Max was never seen again. The lion, Athos, had been placed into a zoo, where it had lived the rest of its life in isolation, separated from everything it had once known. Sarah's mind raced. Max, the dog that had been crying outside the cage, had to have remembered something. Perhaps it had recognized the lion in some distant way. Perhaps from the days they had shared as performers, or maybe from a deeper connection that had never been severed, not even by time. The question still burned in Sarah's mind. Why had the dog come back? How had it found the lion? And what was the purpose of the dog's cry? She closed the file, her thoughts spinning. She knew she had to speak with the zoo's director, Mr. Patterson. She needed to know more. The information in the file was only the beginning, and she knew that the answer to mystery was bigger than anything she had anticipated. Later that afternoon, Sarah made her way to the director's office. As she entered, she noticed Mr. Patterson sitting at his desk, looking over some papers. His face was as stern as always, but she could tell that something was weighing on his mind. Perhaps, like her, he had begun to sense that there was more to the story of the dog and the lion. Sarah, Mr. Patterson said without looking up, I assume you've been following the strange events with the lion and the dog? Yes, sir, Sarah replied, her voice steady but with a hint of urgency. I've been researching the lion's history, and I've come across some unsettling information. The lion's name was Athos, and it was once part of the circus, paired with a dog named Max. After a tragic accident, the dog disappeared, and the lion was brought to the zoo. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that the dog, Max, has returned. It's the same dog from the zoo. I believe the dog recognized Athos, and it's been crying outside the cage because it wants to reconnect. Mr. Patterson looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. You know the rumors, Sarah. There are many stories about that lion's past, but we've never been able to verify any of them. What you're suggesting is quite extraordinary. I know, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. But I've seen it with my own eyes. Max knows Athos, and I believe their bond is never truly broken. The lion, it's different now, and I believe the gate opening wasn't just a coincidence. It was a sign that the two are meant to be together again. Mr. Patterson leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped. For a moment he said nothing. Sarah felt her heart beat faster, wondering if he would dismiss her theory, or worse, tell her that she was overstepping her boundaries. "You've made a compelling case, Sarah," Mr. Patterson said, finally breaking the silence. "But this is a delicate matter. If what you're saying is true, it could change everything. We need to be careful. If the dog and the lion truly have this bond, we must understand the consequences. There are many questions that need answering." Sarah nodded eagerly. "I'm willing to take the next step, sir. We can investigate this further. But I need your approval to work with the dog and the lion more closely, to see if we can uncover more about their past and how they're connected." Mr. Patterson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You have my approval, Sarah, but be cautious. This could be more than we're prepared for." With that, Sarah left the director's office, feeling both exhilarated and anxious. She had received permission to continue her investigation, but the weight of the responsibility was clear. This was not just about a reunion of two animals. It was about uncovering a forgotten past, a secret that had been buried for years. The future of the zoo, and perhaps even the fate of the animals involved, rested on what she uncovered next. The days that followed felt like a blur of action and investigation. Sarah's resolve had never been stronger. She was determined to uncover the full extent of the story behind Athos and Max. It wasn't just about the bond between the two animals anymore. It was about the history they shared and the legacy that had been hidden for so long. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly starting to fall into place, but there were still many unknowns. Sarah worked tirelessly, pulling together all the resources at her disposal. She scoured old circus records, revisited the zoo's archives, and spent countless hours in the company of the dog and the lion, watching them closely, trying to understand the depth of their connection. She noticed the subtle ways in which the two interacted, the way the lion would gently nuzzle the dog's head, the way the dog would sit quietly next to the lion, its eyes soft with understanding. It wasn't just affection, it was something far more profound. One afternoon, Sarah found herself in the library of the zoo, poring over yet another folder filled with old circus memorabilia. As she flipped through the yellow pages, something caught her eye, an old photograph. It was black and white, and the quality was poor, but the image was unmistakable. In the photo, Athos stood proudly next to a small, scrappy shepherd dog, Max. The two animals were locked in an intense gaze, and in that moment, it was clear to Sarah that they had shared a bond that transcended the circus performance. They were more than just performers. They were companions, perhaps even family. As Sarah studied the photograph, a sudden realization hit her. The dog's cry, the one that echoed outside the lion's cage, wasn't just a cry of longing. It was a call to the past, a desperate plea to remember something important, something that had been lost. The dog had known. It had remembered their bond, their shared history, and had been calling out to Athos to reunite them. Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had uncovered the missing link, the truth behind the lion's strange behavior, the dog's emotional cry. But there was still something else, something that seemed just out of reach. She took the photograph and walked to the director's office. Mr. Patterson was busy as usual, but when Sarah entered, his attention immediately turned to her. "What have you found, Sarah?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. Sarah placed the photograph on his desk. "This," she said simply. "This is the key." Mr. Patterson leaned forward and studied the photo. His expression was unreadable as he took in the image of the lion and the dog together. For a long time, he said nothing. Sarah could see that he was processing the implications of what she had just shown him. "I know what this photo means," Sarah continued. The bond between Athos and Max wasn't just a circus act. It was something deeper, something that goes beyond performance. These two animals shared a connection that went beyond the stage, I believe that the reason Max cried outside the cage wasn't just to be near the lion. It was to remind Athos of their past, to help the lion remember who it truly was. Mr. Patterson's eyes narrowed. But what does this mean for the zoo, Sarah? What does it mean for us? That's what I need to find out, Sarah replied, her voice filled with determination. But we can't ignore what we've seen. The bond between these two is real, and it's not just about giving them freedom or letting them live together. It's about understanding their past and what it can teach us about how we interact with animals in captivity. Mr. Patterson sat back in his chair, clearly deep in thought. I see what you're saying. You believe that this bond, this memory, is something we need to respect, something we can learn from. Sarah nodded. Yes, it's not just about letting them be together. It's about honoring their legacy. Athos and Max were more than just animals in a circus. They were a team, a partnership, and now we're in a position to do something important, something that could change the way we think about animal behavior, captivity, and companionship. Mr. Patterson leaned forward again, his eyes locking onto Sarah's. You've made your case, Sarah. I think it's time we take a different approach with Athos and Max. We'll work together on this. Let's see where this journey takes us. Over the next few weeks, Sarah, Mr. Patterson, and the rest of the zoo's team worked tirelessly to devise a plan that would allow Athos and Max to live together. They carefully studied the animals' behavior, their needs, and the dynamics of their bond. They consulted with animal psychologists, veterinarians, and animal behavior experts to ensure that the reunion was safe and beneficial for both animals. They even reached out to the public, explaining the situation and the unique bond between the lion and the dog. The response was overwhelming. People were fascinated by the story, and many supported the idea of allowing the animals to reunite. But there was one last hurdle to overcome. The zoo had strict regulations about animal safety, and the idea of allowing a lion and a dog to live together was unprecedented. The team had to navigate bureaucracy and ensure that the animals' well-being was guaranteed. After weeks of planning, Sarah and Mr. Patterson stood together in front of Athos's cage. The moment had come. With great care, they opened the gate and allowed Max to enter. The dog hesitated for a moment, sniffing the air and looking around. Then, with a soft bark, Max walked toward the lion. Athos stood up, its massive frame towering over the smaller dog. For a moment, the two animals simply stared at each other, as if they were both waiting for the other to make the first move. Then, just like in the past, the dog slowly approached the lion, its tail wagging gently. Athos lowered its head, acknowledging the dog's presence. The two animals stood together in complete silence, as if everything had come full circle. Sarah watched from a distance, her heart swelling with emotion. She had witnessed something extraordinary, something that no one else would ever fully understand. The bond between Athos and Max was not just a connection between two animals. It was a reminder of the power of memory, of the deep ties that can exist between creatures, even across time. As the days passed, Sarah continued to observe Athos and Max. Their bond only grew stronger, and the zoo's visitors were captivated by the unique relationship between the two. It wasn't just about entertainment. It was about something far deeper, a lesson in loyalty, in memory, and in the way we relate to animals. The story of Athos and Max became a symbol for the zoo. It reminded everyone who saw it that animals are not just creatures to be admired from afar. They are sentient beings, capable of love, loyalty, and deep emotional bonds. The legacy of Athos and Max was a reminder that even in captivity, animals should never be forgotten. Their stories are worth telling, and their memories are worth preserving. As for Sarah, she knew that the journey she had undertaken had changed her forever. She had unlocked a hidden legacy, a bond that had transcended time and space. It wasn't just the lion and the dog that had been reunited. It was a deeper understanding of the connection between all living creatures and the responsibilities we have to them. And in the end, Athos and Max weren't just animals in a zoo. They were a testament to the power of friendship, memory, and the timeless nature of love.